So welcome back. This is part two, and a much shorter part two than part one because I'm only really going to be covering two things. I promised that we'd be talking about the parables. It's a slight lie because actually four parables one morning, 25 minutes is not going to happen. So I'm just going to be looking at the parable of the sower and then trying to understand a bit more about some of these really odd sayings. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. So the parable of the sower, well, lots of people can look at this in lots of different ways. But for me, there's really just three different ways to look at the parable of the sower. And you can look at it from three different viewpoints. Each of us can be either or all of these. You could look at it as though you were the sower. You could look at it as if you were the seed. Or you could be a sort of outside observer seeing what's going on. Each way, the seed represents something about the kingdom of God. And by that, what I mean is a place where God's influence is the preeminent influence, where everyone in that place, or that virtual place, if you like, their top priority is serving and loving God. So, if you are the sower, what is Jesus saying about you? Well, firstly, sowers, that's their job. You don't have another job. You are the sower. You sow. You don't do anything else. Okay? And when you sow, you don't place your seeds carefully. No, you just scatter them. Now, I'm not sure quite what a sower might do, but the sower that Jesus is talking about here indiscriminately appears to scatter them in all sorts of places where the seed looks pretty doomed. Well, that is interesting, isn't it? Because actually Jesus is therefore telling us, if we're going to be sowers of the kingdom of God, don't be selective. Don't just look for people who you think might be receptive to the kingdom of God. Get on with it. So wherever you go, so with all the people that you come in contact with, because you probably are not the best judge of where to sow. So that's one perspective. Another perspective might be as an outside observer. Now, if you were an outside observer watching this sower sow and then coming back to the field at various points after that, you might notice a high failure rate of seed germination. Okay, but the farmer, on the other hand, or the sower, might be quite happy with the total yield of the field overall. So although you might be worried about the seeds that aren't growing properly, the farmer isn't so happy. This outside observer might also notice something else, that the plants look nothing like the seed. In fact, this comes out in the mustard seed parable as well. So, just as Jesus doesn't tell the crowd everything, he doesn't come out with his entire manifesto, all he does is place a little nugget or a seed that grows, and that's all that's needed to get things started, but only for some. So that outside observer will also notice that some seed has pretty much no chance. Those are well illustrated by Jesus as the ones that are sown in the rocks, the ones that get eaten by the birds, and the ones that lie on the path. And so for this explanation that Jesus gives us in the second part, it seems almost impossible for the kingdom of God to be established in some settings. This really doesn't seem fair if that's someone's life that this might be referring to. So we come to the third viewpoint, is that as if you are the seed. So in this context, you are the seed. Can you actually do anything about whether you can grow or not? Now, I remember when I first heard a talk, perhaps the first talk I ever heard on this particular parable, I was kind of encouraged to become like the seed in the good soil and avoid the weeds. Well, I can kind of understand that at one level, but that's really not what the parable is saying. In fact, Jesus even goes further, and he tells us at the end of it, well, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Now, Jesus then goes a little bit further, and he then quotes a bit of Isaiah. This is what he's actually saying then. He says, they may be ever seeing but never perceiving, and ever hearing but never understanding. Otherwise, they might turn and be forgiven. Well, that sounds pretty much exactly what he's saying, that these people are completely doomed to never actually get what the kingdom of God's about and be excluded from God's promises. However, what is hidden from us, at least, is the next part of the passage. And so I went to Isaiah and just looked at the bit where this is coming from. Let's just find that. And read a little bit more. So here is Isaiah 6, verse 9. And Isaiah is told to go and tell this to the people. Be ever hearing, but never understanding. Be ever seeing, but never perceiving. Make the heart of this people calloused and their ears dull, and close their eyes. So this very much in keeping with what Jesus is saying. And then Isaiah says, but for how long, O Lord? And he answered, until the cities lie ruined and without inhabitants, until the houses are left deserted and fields ruined and ravaged, until the Lord has sent everyone far away and the land is utterly forsaken. And it carries on there. But finally, and the very last line, it's at that stage, talks about the holy seed being the stump in the land. So this is a very interesting thing, because the Jews who would have heard Jesus quoting that a little bit from Isaiah really knew their Bibles pretty well and would have memorized a lot of the Old Testament. And as they heard Jesus talking, bringing out those first couple of verses about hearing and never understanding, they would have filled in the second bit about the land being ravaged, and that would be the time that the seed would be established from a stump, as was described in the passage. So this is quite a different way to kind of present things. You're not presenting absolutely everything all at the same time. And that's yet more of this kind of cliffhanger-based teaching that Jesus was so keen on at this particular time. So interesting way of looking at it, isn't it? Rather different, perhaps from what I'd expected, certainly when I got into this passage this morning. Perhaps it's a bit more informational this morning than in some other talks. But there's so much that we can learn, not just from what Jesus does, but how he does it. Now, you may not have 110 million Instagram followers, but you can leave little seeds of the kingdom of God everywhere and with everyone. Now, these seeds won't grow with everyone, but it's hard for us to tell where they'll grow best. And so what are these seeds? Well, this is something of how your life has been changed by Jesus being part of it, and how his grace. You don't have to get everything across. In fact, if Jesus believes in cliffhanger-based teaching, that's probably a good way to go.